Hey, fourth graders, welcome back. It is Monday, and today will actually be the only math lesson that I give you this week because tomorrow, Tuesday, we will be doing a little review, and on Wednesday, we'll be having a quiz right before we start spring break next week. Today, we'll be looking at line plots. So let's take a little look into what a line plot is. Alright, so I will be showing you guys an example of a line plot in just a second, but I want to talk a little bit about what a line plot is. So here are three things about a line plot. One, a line plot shows data using a number line. Now I know we had a lesson on number lines a couple lessons ago, but line plots use number lines. Number two, the marks above the number line show the number of times a data value occurs. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. And number three, the line plot should have a title that describes the data. So there will be a title that is above or below the data of the number line that helps you understand what this is about. So let's take a look at my first line plot that we're going to look at today. So as you can see, my line plot has a number line similar to what we talked about in a previous lesson. It's got different points above my number line, and that represents data. And we'll talk about that in just a second. And it also has a title, Hours Spent Reading. Okay, so this line plot here tells me about how many hours were spent reading. Okay, now what I didn't put on here was what each one of these little dots represent. Each one of these dots here represent a different reader. Okay, now and down here this is the number of hours that was read by each reader. Okay, we're going to look at 5 questions. These 5 questions are very similar to one of the pages that I'm going to have you work on today. But let's take a look at each of these 5 questions individually, starting with question number 1. Question number 1 simply says, how many total readers are there? Let's take a look back at my line plot. All right, so we're back here, and my first question was, how many total readers are there? Okay, so I don't have to look down here because this is my number of hours. Each one of these dots actually represents the total number of readers. So all I need to do is just count up how many total dots I have on my line plot. I have 2, plus 4 is 6, plus 2 is 8, plus 3 is 11, plus 3 more is 14, 15, and 16. So question 1, my answer would be 16 total readers. Question 2 asks, how many readers read for 3/4 of an hour? All right. Question 2 asks, how many readers read for 3/4 of an hour? Now what I need to do is, I notice that down here it says hours, which means each of my fractions here represent hours. Okay, so this would be like 1/4 of an hour, half of an hour, 3/4 of an hour, and so on and so forth. My question asks, how many readers read for 3/4 of an hour? So all I need to do on this line plot is look at my 3/4 of an hour and count how many readers read for 3/4 of an hour. In which case I see 2 dots, which represent 2 readers. So 2 readers read for 3/4 of an hour. Question 3 asks, what was the least amount of time that a reader read for? Let's take a look. So what was the least amount of time that a reader read for? Well, I know that down here is 0 hours. Thankfully, no one didn't read at all. Up here is 2 hours. Looks like one person read for 2 hours. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to look at the bottom of my number line and see where the least amount of hours were read. Okay, I see that 1/4 is my lowest tick mark, and I see that there were some readers who read for 1/4 of an hour, which means that my answer would be 1/4 of an hour. All right, so question 4 is a really tricky question to understand, so listen carefully. Okay, so question 4 asks, how many less hours were read by the lowest reader than the reader who read the longest? Okay, so we need to compare the lowest amount of hours compared to the highest amount of hours, and we're going to subtract. All right, for this question, we're comparing how many less hours were read by the lowest reader than the reader who read for the longest amount of time. Now look in here, I see that 2 hours would be where my reader read for the longest, and 1/4 of an hour would be for my readers who read for the shortest amount of time. Now when I compare this, I need to subtract. So I need to take 2 hours and subtract 1/4 of an hour away from that. Now I know that I can also change 2 hours into 8/4 hours. And if I do 8/4 and subtract 1/4, I would get 7/4, or 1 hour and 3/4 of an hour. And finally, question 5 asks, how many total hours were read by readers who read for 1.5 hours? And for this question, we're looking specifically at how many total hours were read by readers who read for 1.5 hours. So all I need to do is just look at this spot on my number line here, and I need to count first off, how many readers read for 1.5 hours, and that's 3. Now, what's the total amount of hours read by those 3 readers? Well, I would do 1.5 times 3, or I can just add 1.5 3 times. So 1.5 plus 1.5 is 3, plus another 1.5 is 4.5 hours read by my 3 readers who read for 1.5 hours each. So as you could probably see already, that you can learn a lot of information just from one line plot. Let's take a look at this other line plot here. So my title for this line plot is Hours Spent Outside. Down here I have my label of hours, which means all of these fractions here represent hours that were spent outside. Okay, but notice I don't have any data here. That my last line plot, I had some data here. Okay, what you're going to have to do in your math homework today is you're going to have to see a table where all the data is, and you're going to have to put that data down onto the line plot. Okay, now what I would do is I would look and I see 1/3 hours. I know that the 1/3 hours is up here on the line plot. I also know that it's down here on my number line too. I see that 2 people spent 1/3 of an hour playing outside. So in a second here, I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to put 2 dots down here for my 1/3 of an hour, because I know that 2 people spent 1/3 of an hour outside. For 1 1/3 of an hour, I see that 6 people spent 1 1/3 of an hour outside. So for 1 1/3 of an hour, I'm going to put 6 dots going all the way up. I'm going to pause the video a second. I'm going to put my data in and show you what I come up with. Here's what I came up with. So for my 1/3 of an hour, I have 2 people that spent 1/3 of an hour outside. So I have 2 dots above my 1/3 mark. For 2/3, I have 3 dots to represent the 3 people. For 1 hour, I have 5 dots because I know that 5 people spent 1 hour outside. 6 people spent 1 1/3 of an hour outside. No one spent 1 2/3 of an hour outside, and I know that because I have a 0 right here in my table. And 1 person spent 2 hours playing outside. Okay, so that wraps up our lesson today. Let me know if you guys have any questions. They're just 2 pages to work on today, but feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and as always, wash your hands.